Alrighty. So thank y'all for being here. We can just have as a casual presentation. Questions can come in basically almost any time. So just feel free to raise your hand and I'll get to you. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here again, and we can get started. So we see AI development and efforts towards regulating these systems increasingly becoming centralized in Western countries, despite the impacts of AI and other systems transcending borders. We see Western corporations that are at the frontier, quote unquote, of AI development be largely reliant on the African continent, alongside others for natural resources like tantalum, cobalt, and tungsten, which form the GPUs that power these large language models, or large AI models, also known as foundation models, as coined by Stanford. And we also see these human resources, particularly from data annotation and also content moderation, which are used to train and refine AI systems. Given that we see Africa is seen as the next frontier for AI development, also something that Sam Altman recently mentioned, we see that digital resources like data that advance the capabilities of AI will likely become the next commodity that's exploited by foreign entities. And so this could potentially fuel, if not already, this new era of techno-neocolonialism. We see that these current concerns, along with issues of bias, disinformation, climate impacts, and economic inequality, elevate a need for comprehensive and robust, alongside harmonized AI and data regulation efforts across Africa. This talk will talk about many of these aspects, particularly focusing on AI and data governance, the burgeoning AI ecosystem in the continent, and then also thinking about some priorities to democratize African participation in AI development and governance. So we see that when it comes to AI progress across the world, AI development is primarily centralized in countries like China, the US, Canada, the UK, and also those throughout the EU. This includes countries like France and Germany. However, we've begun to also see a lot of progress from African grassroots AI and machine learning communities that have really helped to fill in some of these capacity gaps of accessing traditional AI and machine learning education, particularly from these universities and also tertiary institutions that offer these master's and PhD level courses and programs. So across the continent, we see organizations like Masakane and Ghana NLP developing data sets and machine translation tools to help expand access to low-resource African languages. We also see efforts like Deep Learning Ndaba, AI Saturdays Lagos, and also Data Science Africa and Data Science Nigeria, among many others, helping to grow and enhance these communities of AI researchers. And so they offer things like study groups and even up to workshops and large conferences, like Deep Learning Ndaba, which will be held later this year in Kigali. And so outside of natural language processing, we also see these specialized AI communities also beginning to form. And so they focus on healthcare, like Sisonke Biotique in South Africa, and then also AfriClimate AI, focusing on sustainability. And then we also, fortunately, began to see a bit more, diversity in terms of where these communities are focused. And so within Francophone West Africa, we have organizations like AI Hub Senegal and also Camera in Cameroon. And then also in Northern Africa, we have Morocco AI, the Tunisian AI Society, and also Zaire AI in Algeria. When it comes to academic AI research, I'm particularly fond of this, as a computer scientist and, someone who has gone through extensive academic training. And so it's great to also see that we've begun to see more progress in AI research labs across the continent. And many of this have been traced to the 2020 four-year, 20 million Canadian dollars AI for Development in Africa initiative, also known as AI4D. And so this is funded by the IDRC, which is Canada's international aid agency, and also CEDA, which is Sweden's International Development Agency. We also see these notable academic labs, AI labs, particularly begun to rise on the continent in countries like Uganda with the AI and Data Science Research Lab at Makerere University, also the Data Science for Social Impact Lab at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, and also the AI and Robotics Lab at the University of Lagos in Nigeria. There are also more formal degree programs arising in AI and machine learning. I know some of you are familiar with the African Master in Machine Intelligence that's offered by the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences, and then also masters in AI from the University of Mauritius, and a bachelor in AI, which is offered by Kumasi Technical University in Ghana. And so it's really great to see AI degrees being offered at these very relatively early stages. When it comes to the market map for AI in Africa, we've also seen a lot of growth, particularly in countries that have already been known as tech hubs on the continent. So this includes countries like Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Tunisia, and Egypt. I'll talk about Tunisia in a bit because they have a very interesting use case in terms of a startup that arose out of the country as well. And so these startups, they focus on a range of fields that include healthcare, language generation, robotics, and also just generally show a lot of promise to help address some of these fundamental development problems, but not, obviously solve them completely. So, according to Startup List Africa, there are 85 AI startups on the continent that have received cumulative funding of about $262 million. The top 10 have commanded about $238 million, and the top 3 have commanded $207 million or $208 million or so. And so this is, again, not a comprehensive list. It's honestly sometimes a bit hard to determine if a startup is purely an AI startup or leveraging AI in their operations, but this is one of the best analysis that I could find as of late last year or so. Oh, go ahead, yeah.
Do you know if there's any theme to those startups? Is there any particular tasks that they have in common, or are they just general?
I would say for me, when I also did analysis for a book chapter I wrote, but this is really early. It was published in January of 2023, but we did the analysis basically way before ChatGPT came out. And so I feel like I saw a lot of fintech startups adding AI for identity verification, fraud detection. We didn't really see a lot of growth in terms of language generation or NLP stuff, which we do see a lot of grassroots efforts focus on now. So I think a lot of it's focused on finance. We do see healthcare and medicine. Sorry, not healthcare, healthcare and also agriculture. I think agriculture is probably one of the main areas that we see too. Cool, thank you. All right, so now we get to InstaDeep, which is actually one of the most successful, or not the most successful AI startups to come out of Africa. And so in 2023, it was acquired for $680 million by BioNTech, which is a German pharmaceutical company. And it was founded in Tunisia in 2014. And it has more than 400 employees across the world at different offices, in London, Paris, Berlin, Tunis, Lagos, Cape Town, Boston, and San Francisco. And so InstaDeep focuses on decision-making AI systems for biology, logistics, electrical design, and energy. And one of the co-founders, Karim Bruguier, is a really, I would say, a prominent voice within the African AI ecosystem space, and also supports AI startups and educational efforts across Africa too, which is great to see that as well. He also returns back to Tunisia to found InstaDeep, and so this is something I think that's also really inspiring as well. And so this research comes from AfriLabs, which is a network organization that supports innovation hubs and centers across Africa. And this work is analyzed by TechAbal, which is basically a tech publication within Africa. And they show that basically 50% of African AI startups are just in 7 countries. And so again, as mentioned or showed in one of the maps earlier, we do see a lot of correlation between basically these existing tech hubs like South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, and the correlation with where AI startups are as well. And this is a book chapter I mentioned on responsible AI in Africa, published in January 2023. And so the analysis, honestly, is a bit outdated because, of the ChatGPT's launch in November of 2022. But we analyzed 102 AI startups just to really understand the problems they addressed and the implications that this has for the wider African startup ecosystem. And very similar to the prior slide, we did see that there was not that much diversity in terms of where these startups were located. And I think this is also just a big issue because investors particularly are more likely to invest in English-speaking African countries because a lot of investors in African startups are from the US, UK, and similar regions like that. And so we see a lot of exclusion, from Francophone and also Lusophone Africa. So, as we continue to grow the AI ecosystem across Africa, it'll be really essential that AI services built on the continent also serve these diverse linguistic communities and cultural communities as well. And so there's so many challenges across AI ecosystem, and not just, dedicated to AI particularly, but we have things like infrastructure, education, digital literacy, and just unequal access to ICT resources and services that have impacted the African continent for decades. And so this, impacts things like infrastructure, obviously, particularly when we consider the large amounts of data that are needed to train AI systems and the high number of computing resources that are consumed in this process. And so, again, infrastructure really challenges the abilities of African researchers and developers to innovate in this space. We've seen that particularly many challenges with internet access, and the International Telecommunications Union has estimated that in 2011, internet penetration across the continent was about 8%, and it grew to 36% in 2021. And the numbers, honestly, haven't really changed that much. I think we had some issues with issues exacerbated by the COVID pandemic as well. So I think it's around 45% now, but we'll have to look at that. Fortunately, we also see a lot of efforts that have begun to focus on improving connectivity across the continent. This map on the screen details the To Africa cable, and so this is the longest subsea internet cable that's ever been designed. It's currently under deployment and has 46 connections to land-based networks across 33 countries in Africa, Asia, and Europe. And so again, we only know that internet access is only just one aspect of a successful AI ecosystem. And so we also see other challenges across Africa that include things like digital literacy, AI talent concentration, and also having access to these relevant data sets to build and train these AI models. So building upon these infrastructure challenges, this research is really interesting. It comes from the Oxford Internet Institute, and it shows that AI compute is also unequally distributed globally. So their work classifies countries basically into three categories. So we have the Compute North, where predominantly rich countries host data centers with the latest GPUs for training these frontier AI models. And then we also have the Compute South, which essentially are these predominantly middle-income countries that host older GPUs that are relevant for deploying, but not necessarily, training this frontier AI models. And then we have the Compute Desert, which you can basically see like right in the middle of the map, and also around Russia and similar areas where countries have no cloud AI compute at all. And they may have necessarily like data centers, but this doesn't necessarily count data centers that are specifically used for non-AI purposes. Again, we see these disparities with regions like Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, and also Oceania, specifically around the smaller islands, not having a lot of access, to these specific compute clusters as well. And then also very interesting work. A lot of the researchers from this project are actually here at MIT. And so this is from the Data Provenance Initiative. And so this work was, I think, mainly published starting from 2024. And I know they also had papers at iClear and some other conferences as well. And so they conducted a wide-scale audit of data sets that were used to train AI systems. And they found extreme disparities in the global representation of data sets, and found that less than 0.2% comes from Africa or South America. Again, we see that these issues of underrepresentation impact the development of AI systems. And this is something I wrote recently for the International AI Safety Report that was chaired by Professor Yoshua Bengio. And this leads to bias and also unequal performance of these tools on global languages, cultures, and also value systems as well. And so now we get to the topic of digital literacy, which is honestly something I think is a bit hard to really address because people have to have access to these digital technologies in the first place to really become literate in a sense. And the World Bank shows that out of all world regions, sub-Saharan Africa has the lowest percentage of citizens that are equipped with digital skills. And so this equals to about half of the average level of digital literacy or digital skills adoption that we see globally. Thus, we also have to ensure that AI is accessible to these broader non-technical populations across Africa, particularly when it comes to women, youth, and older adults who tend to be excluded from digital technologies as well. And so efforts that are focused on literacy and other things, and media training as well, have to ensure that these populations are included. Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Just one question. What's usually counted in digital literacy? Is it like being able to navigate the web, email, or is it like something more specific?
Yeah, I think it's, yes, some of those. I don't have the specific, I would say, measures or metrics from what the World Bank measures, but I think it's a lot of that. I don't think social media is included. I think it's really just like sending text messages, accessing email. They probably being able to do like a basic search on some search platform. So, yeah. Yeah, it's hard to say because I think like for search, many people would not necessarily do that well. I think like for communication, like texting, and also like calling, I think like people would score a bit higher on that. But when it comes to like information seeking and access, I think that's also a big challenge too. And then it's definitely changed with all the disinformation and misinformation too. So, yeah. Thank you. And so this slide talks about the respective concentration and production of AI talent, something that I've also written about. And when we consider basically where AI talent is concentrated, we have mainly two countries. So this is the US and also China. And so India is also really an interesting place, but they have, I would say, a lot of attrition, which is also known as like brain drain, because developers, from India, often go to the Canada, US, the UK to basically seek these like tech jobs and also AI jobs as well. However, we've seen some interesting research. This was published in the Harvard Business Review that shows that there are many hotspots, particularly a lot within India and also within other global South, global majority countries. In cities like Johannesburg, Nairobi, and Lagos, also quickly becoming AI hotspots within the continent. And again, these cities basically kind of correspond to, I would say, like the countries that are already hotspots for tech talent as well. So it would be really great to see how this evolves over the next couple years to include some of the smaller markets across Africa. And something which is really interesting is that I mentioned branding previously. This is also an issue that affects African countries, particularly more so in the service domain. So we see a lot of like medical workers and also domestic workers leaving the continent, for the Middle East and also other countries as well. And so this report is basically, this image is analysis or report of the 2021 Africa Developer Ecosystem initiative that was detailed by Google. And so they estimate that about 38% of African developers, they work in Africa for a company that has its headquarters outside of the continent. And so they haven't necessarily updated this report recently. I've also seen organizations like OECD report on these stats. So I'm not sure what the trend is for AI jobs, but I know that, for example, Microsoft, IBM, and Google have big AI hubs on the continent, and so I assume they also have a higher concentration of AI talent compared to other like local companies as well. And so again, for AI talent within Africa, or just for the African AI ecosystem to grow more broadly, there has to be efforts that encourage people to stay and be well compensated, for the labor that they contribute to developing, researching, and also building AI systems. And so I'll talk about AI and data governance in Africa. It'll be very broad. There's so many different developments that are happening. I actually recently found out that Cote d'Ivoire announced or released their respective AI strategy and data strategy around March 20th or so. So it's good to see a lot of progress, and good to see that my slides are becoming outdated about every month or so. So the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs defines AI governance as a set of rules, regulations, ethical and technical frameworks, and similar mechanisms that guide the development and deployment of AI technologies. I also find that, if you talk to me, that data governance is also a very essential aspect of AI governance, particularly as it provides protections over how personal information is collected, stored, transferred, and also provides data subjects with the ability to have control over their information, and also rights to be informed regarding personal data breaches, which have become bigger or more higher in occurrence, due to many issues around the pandemic, but also limited capacity, of companies across the continent to have effective safeguards for data. And so again, given that we see that data has a fundamental role in training machine learning models, evaluating AI systems, refining predictive models, and also improving AI-enabled services, enacting effective data governance can also form the foundation of robust and comprehensive AI governance measures. Over the past 5 years, global interest in regulating AI has also grown dramatically. We see this effort, this graphic from Authority Hacker shows basically the world stage or state of global AI regulation, and they break it down into 4 tiers. And so they detail countries that have enacted regulation, initiated regulatory efforts, those who are actively working towards regulation, and also those who have no regulation. And so again, similar to some of the other maps I've shown throughout the presentation, we honestly see like Africa sticks out a little bit. And I would say, again, there's a lot of progress. There are about 17 countries or so that have made formal AI strategies. There's technically only one country on the continent that has an AI policy, which is Rwanda. But it's still in draft stage and hasn't been fully enacted. And so I don't even know if they're highlighted on the screen, but it's a very small country, so yeah. And so, again, while we see that the EU has led global regulatory AI efforts, we also see countries across the global majority or global south making progress. And so Brazil actually had a recent AI law that was approved in December 2024. Again, but I also mentioned or talked to some people that there's also been an interesting influence of tech companies on these regulations. There were some provisions in the draft AI law from Brazil that were actually weakened because of lobbying. And so, unfortunately, I do expect this to continue in some manner. And then again, or just more broadly, we see that the increasing development and adoption of AI have really drastically or dramatically shifted practices around data. This has spurred the development of new industries, particularly like data labeling and content moderation, and then also revealed new forms of exploitation, particularly from these respective fields that I mentioned. These new complexities around data production, refinement, and also use have really impacted African countries, and also, again, elevates the need for comprehensive governance and enforcement measures. So about 38 out of 55 African Union member states, so this is 54 African countries, and also the disputed territory of Western Sahara, also known as the Sahrawi Arab Republic, and they have enacted formal data protection regulations. And 15 out of 38 were enacted in the past 5 years, and 26 out of these 38 were enacted in the past decade. And so we saw the first data protection law come into play in 2001 by Cabo Verde. And then also we see that there's been a lot of progress recently over the past year. We see countries like Malawi enacting the data protection law in June 2024, and Ethiopia in July 2024. And then as of yet, we see that there are draft laws that are still in progress from countries that include Namibia, South Sudan, and the Gambia. So we hope to see a bit more progress towards data protection in these countries soon. And then also, aside from these country-specific efforts, we also see efforts from regional economic communities, basically which serve as like economic blocs across Africa, and also entities like the African Union, which I've been fortunate to work with on different initiatives, particularly the AU AI strategy, which I'll detail in the following slide. And so they've introduced these data protection acts and also like cybersecurity and personal data protection. This was actually ratified in 2023, 9 years after it was formally adopted. It was drafted in 2011 in Malabo, which is in Equatorial Guinea, which is where the name comes from, and came into force on June 8th, 2023, after being ratified by Mauritania, which was the 15th country that was needed for full ratification to take effect. Unfortunately, this is, I would say, protection or this framework is not necessarily enforceable, and so this is something I think that the AU will also have to work towards as we expand efforts for data governance and AI governance across Africa. And so regional efforts have also something that I would say I'm a bit more bullish on in terms of them being able to provide more sufficient protections for different African countries. And so we see efforts on data protection that have been implemented by the economic community of West African states, most probably one of the most prominent economic blocs within Africa, known as ECOWAS. And we also have the Southern African Development Community, known as SADC, and also the East African Community, and then, unfortunately, we haven't seen any regional governance measures proposed or enacted by the Arab Maghreb Union, which consists of a lot of Sahel and Northern African states. And then also we have another community for Saharan states, and the Economic Community of Central African states. And honestly, particularly when it comes to Central Africa, there unfortunately happens to be, I would say, a lot of conflict that definitely delays the development and enactment, of data regulation, and probably will follow on to AI regulation. And also within ECOWAS as well, we have 3 countries that actually left the bloc due to different regional and cultural differences. And so I think we stand to see a lack of cohesion, unfortunately, across these respective efforts. And so this work, this graphic is from Lawyers Hub Africa, and basically that does a lot of work around AI and data governance across the continent. And more generally, there's research from the African Observatory on AI that shows that only 25 out of 55 African Union member states have a policy, strategy, plan, or guideline on AI. And so this includes like a ministerial or presidential statement or a fully blown or developed strategy document like that of Mauritius, Nigeria, Rwanda, and other countries as well. And so again, as I mentioned, Rwanda is the only African country that has introduced a formal AI policy. And again, it's yet to be enacted, so we hope to see a lot of progress. I was actually in Kigali earlier this month for the Global AI Summit on Africa. And so there was a lot of progress, like a new declaration for African AI. And so I hope to see movements towards enactment of AI regulations or policies in the near future. Go ahead.
So can I ask, what are some of the the similarities or notable differences between what the EU's policy, strategy, and plan, and what the AU is doing?
Yeah, I would say when we think about AU member states, countries, the thing is, because there isn't advanced AI development, a lot of the plans are really focused on how can we leverage AI across these different sectors. So a lot of them, and when I worked on the AU AI strategy, it's focused on healthcare, education, agriculture, and many of the state level or national level strategy documents also mimic this as well. We don't necessarily see the EU talking about, oh, we want to leverage AI in agriculture because they already have to an extent, and I would say there's more of I guess people call this a human rights approach or framework to governing AI, even though the EU AI Act does fall short, particularly when it comes to covering migrants and other issues around border control and immigration, and they have separate provisions for that. Unfortunately, I don't see And I wanted to say, like, African countries are thinking about developing and implementing AI in responsible ways, but they don't necessarily take the forefront of like these respective approaches compared to like how the EU has, I would say, positioned themselves to be. So those would probably be the main differences I see. Yeah. Cool.
Another question sort of related to, well, it is like how much heterogeneity is there in sort of policies and sort of at the high level of different states or various policies?
Yeah, I would say for me, I actually just see a lot of similarities or homogeneity across these strategy documents, and sometimes like you start to see that they become very repetitive. But I know that countries are also trying to understand how AI aligns best with their respective national priorities. I don't think honestly there's enough emphasis on doing that. For example, I'll talk about Angola later, but the country's actually very focused on oil, and I don't think they have they don't have an AI strategy. I know they do have a data protection strategy, and so I assume like any document they develop will probably more so align with basically trying to understand how AI can augment their respective like oil, petroleum, gas sector as well. And so I think that other African countries should take similar approaches, but obviously there are other concerns around climate, ethical issues, and bias as well. So yeah, go ahead.
I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but you mentioned in your earlier slide that China is comparable to the U.S. in terms of how prevalent AI is, with what has been reported about China's involvement in Africa. I believe development.
Yeah.
I wonder the extent to which China may be able to influence or collaborate or support in some way the development.
Yeah, so I would say it's still, I would say hard to understand like China's influence on the African AI ecosystem. I think they've had made like really great progress and influence basically on infrastructure. So like ports, airports, roads, shipping rails, railways, all that stuff. It's interesting because I felt like there were a lot of the development agencies from Europe actually were playing a big role. So like GIZ from Germany, IDRC, CETA, USAID a little bit now. It's obviously like not really doing anything now, but and so a lot of my understanding or just like belief in a way was that these development agencies were essentially trying to counter China's influence in a way, particularly especially the U.S. Because they had like this effort that was announced in the Biden administration. I think like global AI sharing, something like that. I'm not sure if it will continue or not. And so I think again, like China is actually very well positioned to really start supporting like fundamental African research. Again, not sure how much that is happening, but I think again, I don't like to see Africa be, I don't know, like a ground or like a. What am I trying? I'm trying to say just like a place for people to kind of like pick and choose, how they did with with the Berlin Convention and all that stuff as well. But unfortunately, it is happening. I think the long-term game or goal would be to move towards like sovereignty, data sovereignty, AI sovereignty, but we're still very much far away from there. But I think in the meantime, like African countries also have to understand how they can best like leverage AI in ways that meet their national goals. And unfortunately, I would say like to the US's, I'd say like dislike, many African countries ideologically align more so with China and Russia, than with U.S. and other democratic countries. And so I think this is also something that many governments are considering in terms of how they set up their alliances with international development agencies or the countries themselves. So.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your response. I think it's a follow-up question quickly in terms of collaboration and colonization.
Yeah.
Colonization.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah, this is a very tough question. It seems like, you're well versed in it a bit yourself, but I would say for me, I don't even know if it's possible to do that now, just because like the way of like, I guess, like AI diffusion, or how like AI models and tools and systems are spread across African countries, and also just generally the world. Like, we would really have to like start from the ground up, but we don't have the resources, to build these systems or tools like natively in ways, again, that align with African value systems, and also, comprehensively integrate African data sets as well. And so, yeah, I think, again, we're a bit far past that, and it would really, again, take like kind of a revolution, or just like a reframing or rethinking in terms of how African researchers lead in AI development, and also like approach, and also like what kind of models that they take, or methodology, excuse me, to build these systems in the first place. So, yeah. Thank you. Go ahead.
For follow-up, so how much of the strategy is sort of thinking about sort of like starting from sort of ground up and building something natively, versus like what's the right strategy to maybe adopt one place to depart further? It's sort of like the vision at the point.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't see like, the building from the ground up happening or being mentioned in these documents, because unfortunately, I would say like African countries or researchers have become reliant on these, open source or models, which happen to be more so open weight, like, for example, Llama, and like fine tuning them. And I think honestly, it's a bit of an easier way to approach AI development. But again, I don't think it's the right approach, because I don't think these models are particularly built, for African linguistic context, which is something that I think that's why we need to really invest in this fundamental AI research across the continent. And then also even just like when we consider cultural needs and nuances, and even like, the size of these models is really not feasible in general. So I would love to see more of that being integrated, but it's really not, unfortunately. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Great. Yeah, thanks for the great questions, everyone. Yeah, so now I'll talk about the AU AI strategy. Honestly, won't go too deep into it, but it basically aims to provide guidance to African countries to harness AI to meet Africa's development aspirations. And this basically is a quote from the AI strategy itself. And they mentioned that the goal is also to improve the well-being of African people while promoting ethical use, minimizing potential risk, and also leveraging different opportunities that AI could potentially bring. And so the African Union Executive Council endorsed the Continental AI Strategy during the 45th Ordinary Session in Accra, Ghana. This happened last year from July 18th to 19th, and it was formally released on August 9th. And it's expected to be fully endorsed by the AU heads of state. I think it was supposed to happen earlier this year at the AU summit, but it's still in the process of going into full implementation. And so, again, still waiting to understand how this framework will be binding, and also whether or not the AU will improve enforcement capacity to ensure that all African countries or AU member states can be on the path to developing AI strategies and eventually AI policies, which is the end goal. So now let's talk about some implications of AI in Africa. I think this is what a lot of people will be interested in, and I'm sure you are aware of the different challenges, particularly from AI being purported or like posed as a way to help African countries fast-track development. And so again, we know that these technologies are, filled with different risks and implications. Particularly, we see that a lot of literature on bias and limitations of AI really focus on domains like healthcare, employment, and policing. Unfortunately, we do see a lot of this work focused on Western context, and this is something I have, written about, mentioning how, things, social contexts like race, may not necessarily be applicable across contexts like Africa. Some foreign countries like South Africa, for example, where we do see these racial stratifications. But again, I think it's really important to emphasize or promote, contextual AI research that really understands things like caste and tribe and religion, and also the intersections of these identities, to really promote this contextual understanding of bias and the implications of AI across Africa, and also across the rest of the global South, or the global majority. And so this is a stat I mention a lot, and we see that African countries are spending about $1 billion a year on surveillance contracts with companies that are based in the US, the UK, China, across the EU, and also Israel. In these countries, we see that these technologies have been used to unjustly hold citizens in detention, and also because they've made critical posts to the governments, and also track activities of journalists. There's a really prominent journalist in Eastern Africa, Eastern Southern Africa, Gregory Gondwe, who has actually been jailed and talked about his experiences, dealing with AI-enabled surveillance because of his outspokenness against governments. We've also seen, and this is a very prominent topic at the moment, which is great, about the harms that data annotators and content moderators have faced, particularly within Africa. Kenya is seen as the hotspot or the hub for AI development, and particularly like AI labeling and content moderation within the continent. And again, I think because we see that many African countries have issues around unemployment and even underemployment, that this say data exploitation and also this form of labor may become more widespread because there's a lot of young people in Africa. They're looking for opportunities, and data labeling is relatively easy to do, despite the strenuous task and other issues associated with it as well. Again, we do see a lack, of robust data protections and AI policies throughout the continent's our strategies at the moment, which we are mainly focused on, and I could think this will have a greater impact because or lead to greater levels of misuse as AI continues to grow in reach. Again, I don't want to highlight Africa as being kind of slow in the AI regulation race, because technically, the EU AI Act is the most prominent legislation, and I think mainly the most only enacted regulation. But again, there's still a lot of efforts that African countries need to focus on as well. Go ahead.
This is what we're talking about. Just thinking about kind of like geospatial mapping. Society.
Yeah. You saying that the potential of AI for that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I know Google's doing this. They have a really interesting flood forecasting tool that they've been leveraging and actually has been helpful in predicting floods across Africa, also mainly across the world too. And they have been able to integrate this or allow governments to leverage this information to help with warning systems and everything. There's also a really interesting project from the Distributed AI Research Institute led by Timnit Gebru, and one of the fellows there, I don't want to pronounce her name wrong, but Resajay Sefala, she's in South Africa, and she's actually leveraged AI-based geospatial mapping to actually map apartheid and understanding the differences in housing and also just geographical structures and everything like that too. So that work is super interesting, and I think there's many more implications for a lot of work, actually from MIT researchers and my colleagues Lily Xu, for example, she's starting a professorship at Columbia, and I think next year or later this year. She's done a lot of work on conservation and mapping using AI too. So I think there's a lot of Lily was at Harvard, excuse me, but Milin Tambe was the professor that was leading or steering that work too. So there's a lot of, I think, promise in that domain, and I actually think it's one of the use cases of AI that I'm a bit more, I would say, fond of. So yeah, cool. All right. So this is some work that I've done over the past year and a half or so that really tries to unpack the growing discourse on the negative impacts of technologies like generative AI, for example. This work was really focused on myths and disinformation, particularly in the context of African elections and other democratic processes, because not just in the U.S. but within Africa, we've seen a lot of interesting usage in terms of how these tools have had an impact again on elections. Go ahead.
One of the things that at least has been true to my bench of media, in the Indian context, is a lot of mis and disinformation against your private channels.
Yeah.
How is that true here, and how hard does that make it to study that relatives in the U.S.? Just a couple years ago, you could study on Twitter or something like that.
Yes, I would say like very similar for Africa too, and we also see like how disinformation and misinformation also moves offline, particularly through like radio and also like print media too. So this actually makes it even harder because we know like there's some social media companies. I'm not sure if Twitter's still doing this, but basically like if the community notes and if you saw something, they would actually notify you after you saw it as well. It's very hard to do that, through these encrypted platforms like WhatsApp, Signal, et cetera. And again, even more so harder for, print and radio media as well. So I don't think we have any good statistics on this in Africa. And I think just because it's a measurement problem, that's really hard to focus on. So yeah, cool. All right, and so when it comes to disinformation, just to give a very brief definition, it's the intentional creation and spread of deliberately deceptive information to mislead or influence people, communities, and also institutions. Again, we see that African countries particularly struggle with disinformation, and research from Wasserman and Madrid Morales shows that media consumers in countries like Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa are regularly exposed to disinformation. We've also seen that these issues around dis and misinformation have been exacerbated by the growth or access of information, through platforms like social media, and then again, even further exacerbated by the introduction of generative AI in content production. And so when it comes to African elections, we've seen a lot of different interesting use cases of generative AI. And I think something that I would love to see in future work, it's not a focus of mine at the moment, but really understanding like the usage and impact of AI across African elections. There's been reports and surveys that show, that African governments are actively already leveraging AI to assist with processes like authentication, voter registration, management, and also engagement. And also, some things like detecting cyber threats and aiding in oversight and decision making. And so we've seen a lot of AI-generated propaganda that have influenced elections or even precipitated coups in countries like Nigeria, Burkina Faso, and Senegal. And this really underscores the need for more comprehensive detection and mitigation efforts as well. And so this report was from November 2024, but Ghana held their elections in December of last year, and showed that the incumbent political party within Ghana was using AI to spread misinformation about opposing candidates. But actually, it's also hard to understand the impact of dis and misinformation on voter, I would say intentions or choices, because the opposing candidate party actually won. And so they saw that there were tweets that were using AI-generated profile images, and also they would post between certain times of the day in Ghana time or Ghanaian time as well. And so, again, as I mentioned, the opposing party actually won. So would love to see if there have been like further analysis trying to unpack the actual influence of this content. And so this is a really interesting case, and I like to bring it up because it happened in 2018. And so this is when I would say like GANs were really coming into play, and obviously way before tools like ChatGPT and other image generators like DALL-E and Midjourney and others. And so we've seen that political propaganda has shown to impact coups before, during, and after they happen. And so this happened in 2018, December 2018, and this is a video that claimed to depict Ali Bongo, who was the president of Gabon at the time. And it stirred concern on social media because people noticed that there were unnatural expressions, his eyes weren't moving, his lips were not necessarily super consistent with the words, and also the posture was unnatural, for him, because he was suspected to be very ill and undergoing treatment. And so reports claim that, this video raised concerns about his ability to rule and actually sparked a coup in January 2019, but it later failed. And so again, this has been happening, for, about 7 years, if not longer now. And so I think there still needs to be a bit more awareness in terms of how generative AI and even, more recent technologies continue to impact different processes across Africa. And so in Burkina Faso's most recent coup in September 2022, there's actually a really interesting series of AI-generated images or videos from American-based Pan-Africanists. And so they appear to express support for the new regime. And these videos were initially detected on Twitter and Facebook, and were also shared by people who actually received these videos through WhatsApp. The videos were created from the AI-generated application, Synthesia, and the company actually confirmed the user, banned them, but they never revealed the identity of the person. Also, are we good on time? I'm not sure. Okay, cool. Okay. Cool, no worries. Cool. Yeah, so again, we see that generative AI has a really strong potential to impact democratic processes across Africa, primarily in elections. As you know, there have been a lot of coups, particularly within the Sahelian region, within Western Africa, and so I think there's a lot more potential or possibilities to understand, the role of generative AI in any of these respective events. And so, kind of just to wrap up, I'll talk about some AI policy opportunities for Africa. And really, again, thinking about, we have so many pressing challenges. This includes refining social services, tackling insecurity, planning for climate change, building infrastructure, and also fighting corruption. And so sometimes, in my opinion, they really take greater precedence over regulating AI. And so, however, I think there are efforts needed by African countries to concurrently work towards addressing these issues and also developing robust data and AI regulation. And so this is a paper I wrote with some colleagues last year that focused on case studies of policy development in Africa. And so we show that, African countries face a range of challenges in meeting their technological potential. And, this includes weak or insufficient data protection regimes, and then also a lack or complications in achieving robust oversight frameworks. And then honestly, limited resources to devote specifically to AI governance and development. And I mentioned Angola. And because of their respective priorities in terms of scaling the oil petroleum ecosystem, AI honestly is not a priority for the country. And so just to wrap up, these are some of the, I would say, areas I think, are most essential. It's not super comprehensive. I don't think it's meant to be, but really thinking about how African governments can focus on strengthening data and computing infrastructure, which is, obviously helpful for things outside of AI. Also really thinking about increasing this regional and continental cooperation, particularly, as I mentioned, the role of these regional economic communities in order to bolster countries that don't necessarily have the individual capacity to enact and draft regulations. And then also really thinking about enhancing AI and data governance, also including things like reform, which is something I've written about recently as well. And then, obviously, to help support AI ecosystems, there needs to be efforts to expand AI education and also employment opportunities, many of which will come through entrepreneurship, as we've seen in the case of the U.S., for example. And then again, something I'm very passionate about is accelerating fundamental AI research, because African AI that's used in Africa needs to be developed, to fit the contextual needs and the daily realities of Africans. And then finally, something I don't think that is addressed enough is really just improving this public engagement within AI and really having just the average person understand, about data governance, data privacy, AI regulation as well, and soliciting input from these stakeholders before, strategies or policies come into action, and then also ensuring that they are included in processes to refine and improve, policies and strategies as well. So I'll end here and take any questions, but thank you all for attending. I know it's a very busy point in the semester, so I appreciate the participation. So.